this session. That's the one. We are, as of now, officially recording this session. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. For those who may not be familiar, the Global Shapers community is an international network of young people driving dialogue, action, and change. Founded by the World Economic Forum, the Global Shapers Hub can be found in over 150 countries with over 10,000, as we call them, active shapers all over the world. In Canada, there are 12 hubs from coast to coast to coast, all striving to make change and drive impact in their respective communities. The Ottawa Global Shapers Hub has facilitated many community projects in the past, such as a municipal election awareness campaign, a refugee art show, and a Dress for Success campaign, just to name a few, which brings us to tonight's event. Our Hub's Period Poverty Project team has been working tirelessly to create a space where people can become more aware of the impacts that period poverty has on folks who menstruate. We're lucky to have fabulous speakers here tonight to help us with this and to answer any questions you may have. So with further ado, I'm super excited to announce our amazing guest speaker for tonight's event, the Honorable Jenna Sudds, Member of Parliament for Canada Carleton, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth. Jenna Sudds was first elected as a Member of Parliament for Canada Carleton in 2021. Prior to her federal election from 2018 to 2021, she served on the Ottawa City Council as a City Councillor for Canada North. During this time, she chaired the city's Community and Protective Services Committee and held the role of the Deputy Mayor starting in 2020. Before entering politics, Jenna Sudds was the Executive Director of the CIO Strategy Council and National Technology Forum, and the President and Executive Director of the Canada North Business Association. She has also worked as a senior economist for the Government of Canada for over 10 years. She received a number of awards, one of them a 40 Under 40 award from the Ottawa Business Journal and the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce in 2015, and was named one of the Development Councillors International's Top 40 Under 40 Working in Economic Development in 2017. When it comes to her education, Jenna Sudds holds a Bachelor in Economics from Brock University and a Master of Arts in Economics from Carleton University. MP Sudds, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Leah, and I got to work on cutting that CV down somehow or other. But thank you so much for the kind introduction. And for having me here tonight, for facilitating what I think is a very, very important conversation to be having. So really an honor to get to spend some time with you tonight on a topic that I'm very passionate about, as I'm sure many of you are as well. I did want to as well take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people here from my home in Canada tonight. So again, my thanks. It's great to have this opportunity to join Ottawa Global Shapers community. I'm intrigued to learn more about your activities and how we can be working together. I thought I'd start just with a little bit about how my work on period poverty began. And that was when I was a city councillor. I'm not sure what year. It was the year before the pandemic. What year was that? 2019, I guess. I lose track, right? Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So the year leading up to the pandemic, we'll say it that way, was when I had a chance meeting with two young women here in my community in Canada, two high school students, who, as one of their school projects, decided that they were going to work to address period poverty by collecting products here in our community and providing them to our local women's shelter. And they were putting together these packages for the women, the menstruators at the shelter. And I was very inspired by their drive, by their openness in talking about period poverty. And that led to a few steps, including my putting a motion forward at council that was passed to start a pilot project here in Ottawa to provide period products at 4 community centers. Undoubtedly, COVID created some obstacles and some opportunities around that pilot project, but needless to say, that's where it all began for me. And, part of that, as I spoke with these young ladies and I started to dive into the issue, it's quite shocking to me in a country like Canada that nearly a quarter of Canadian women and a third of women under the age of 25 will tell you that they've struggled to afford menstrual products. And there's something wrong with that statement in a country as fortunate as ours. So we know that costs can be prohibitive. We know that costs can impede, obviously, a menstruator's ability to access products when they need it. And too many women, and especially I will say Indigenous women, women of low means or low income, they really feel the pressure that the costs associated with menstruating have on their monthly budget. And that's just not, to me personally, that's just not acceptable. There needs to be a better way to be able to support menstruators in our country. We know that over the course of a lifetime, on average, a menstruator will spend about $6,000 on products. That adds up, right? And for those without means, and I will also say without access, because there are parts of our country where it is actually very difficult to access products. And from my learnings over the last few years, many northern, remote, and Indigenous communities, some of which are, closed off over the winter months, it can be very much a struggle. It's not only a financial impact, but also just that access piece. So all that to say, that led to the work that I initiated at the city level, which saw this pilot project roll out. We were picking locations for the recreation centers or their city facilities based essentially on analysis of neighborhood equity, which is there's a system that the city uses in order to rank neighborhoods, so that we could try to put this pilot in place in the areas of which it would be most in need. So through the course of that project, it was actually quite wonderful. We ended up working with Period Packs. Some of you may have heard of Period Packs led by Megan and Lauren and a whole team of volunteers to help make this happen. And so there were baskets put in place in multiple washrooms in which individuals could just grab products when they needed, what they needed, which was a great start. But I will say it was the first step of what I hope will be many. And what I am seeing across the country is actually a number of initiatives, whether that be grassroots initiatives or whether that be at the school board or municipal or provincial level. there's actually some great progress being made in various ways and in various capacities. But to me, at the end of the day, it really is, to me, something as natural as menstruating, having your period, should not be a financial burden. We all, throughout all of our lives, have been able to walk into any bathroom and expect that toilet paper would be there for us. And as a bodily function, I believe the same should be said of menstrual products. And I believe that's the work of all of us here on this screen and many others that are fighting this fight to ensure that women menstruators are able to fully participate in their community, in the economy, and have fulfilled lives just as anyone does, with or without their period. Menstrual products are not a luxury, they are a basic need, just as toilet paper is. I know I'm speaking to the converted on this, but I get worked up at times. So all that to say, fast forward to where I am now. I am incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to serve as parliamentary secretary to Minister Ian, the Minister for Women, Gender Equality and Youth. And part of her mandate letter included a pilot project for what we call the Menstrual Equity Fund. And so as her parliamentary secretary, Minister Ian also provides myself with a mandate letter, and she mandated myself to take on the development of the Menstrual Equity Fund, which of course I was very excited to have the opportunity to do. This fund, as it was put into our mandate letters at that point in time, it was not funded. It was simply, it was a campaign commitment that we said as the Liberal Party and now as the government, that we would work to address period poverty in the country. And the fund itself was designed primarily, I would say, to assist women's shelters, not-for-profits, charities, community organizations, youth-led organizations, and the like, to be able to provide menstrual products to those that needed them, full stop. In essence, that's really the goal of the Menstrual Equity Fund in our efforts to help address period poverty. So honestly, such an honor and a joy to be able to take on this piece of work on behalf of our government. And that led me to take on, if you will, the consultation role. It started early last summer, went into the fall, to meet with, to speak with, to understand what was happening on the ground, who was doing the work on the ground. As I said earlier, we're so fortunate in this country to have some incredible grassroots organizations who are really doing the heavy lifting, frankly, at this point in time, often with little means, but with a passion to help address period poverty. So I've spent quite a bit of time across the country, as well as Zooming, having these conversations and better understanding, how they function, who they serve, and also, very importantly, who they're not serving, who they can't reach, because those are really the people that we want to reach. So the Menstrual Equity Fund, as I said, really it's about helping to address period poverty, reaching the folks who have not yet been reached and need to be reached. But the first focus, really, if you take a step back, it's about procurement and distribution. and this is a big country. So not an easy feat, but the question that I have continued to ask is, how do we get period products to people most in need in this country? And the second big piece I should mention as well, that is part of this pilot project, is a focus on education and awareness. Obviously all of us here on the screen, we're, preaching to the converted, but, not all Canadians realize that there are, I believe the data is 1.2 million menstruators in this country who struggle to pay for the products that they need and access the products that they need. Oftentimes period poverty is hidden, just as periods are. Most people still are not talking about menstruating. So imagine the challenge of menstruating and then also struggling to get the products you need. So, my hope, my aspiration is that the Menstrual Equity Fund will encourage everyone, including men and boys, very importantly, men and boys, to have conversations, to normalize menstruating, and to challenge some of the negativity, the negative perceptions that surround it. And I think that, the education piece of this pilot is incredibly important, and that, education is key. We say that in so many facets, but when it comes to menstruation, it is also a big key and a big piece of, the change that we need to make and see in our country to reduce stigma, to promote access to products, and really advance menstrual equity. So maybe as I mentioned, the last summer leading into the fall was really focused on the consultations, trying to understand the logistics, trying to understand from who was already educating, who was doing awareness campaigns, just to get that baseline of information that could help as we started to build what this pilot would look like. And as I mentioned, we met with so many amazing grassroots organizations in the Yukon, in BC, here in Ontario, you name it. We had some really fabulous meetings and conversations, but not just grassroots organizations. There are some larger not-for-profits who are also doing some work in this space, as well as I mentioned, women's shelters are often frontline in seeing the needs in our communities, as are the provinces and the territories and our Indigenous leaders. So we've had consultations essentially with all levels of government, as well as I mentioned, stakeholders across the country. And, a lot of those conversations, they ranged to talking about the demand that they saw in their communities for menstrual products. We talked about the importance of access, ensuring access, which varies dramatically in some parts of the country. And then, what initiatives are already underway to help serve Canadians who are in need of menstrual products. And then very importantly, the question I always ask is, who aren't you reaching? Because I think that is such a key piece that we make sure as we move forward with our work and what's occupying a lot of my time, that we find those people who really need access. Another really important piece that I've learned through this work is the importance of choice. So menstrual products it's a very personal decision. Everyone has their own preferences, their own needs. And, I'm sure all of us on this screen who menstruate have different preferences and different requirements. And so, I think it is so important for everyone in this space, everyone doing this work, to honor people's choices and to ensure that for those of us who are working to address period poverty and provide products, that we provide choice, because honestly, choice gives people dignity. The other conversation that I thought was really interesting that you might enjoy is just the conversation around reusable products. There's a growing number of choices in this country, and actually some really incredible sustainable Canadian women-led companies, Joni, Be Free Cups. There's just some great companies that are working in the sustainability side of menstrual products, and not just sustainable products or reusable products as well. And there's definitely some challenges around reusable products for some, in that they're not always accessible for everyone. And I would say, especially when we had conversations about this in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, where it wasn't always felt, whether it was culturally appropriate or whether it was a matter of having access to facilities and clean water. These are considerations that, recognizing that reusable products aren't for everyone, and being cognizant, again, of providing choice for people. The other piece I mentioned, cultural considerations. The other discussion point in some of our consultations was the use of tampons. And the reality that some cultures don't embrace or encourage the use of tampons. And in other examples, some Indigenous communities actually prefer the ability to allow free bleeding. There's so much to be said about cultural awareness, and again, ensuring choice for people when they do come forward or when they do need access to products. So I think above all else, as we went through these consultations and as I continue in this work, it's really important to recognize that we all know best what our needs are and what our body wants or needs. And offering menstruators choice supports their dignity. So that's always top of mind for me as we move forward with designing the menstrual equity pilot project. So throughout these consultations, I think and as I've shared with you some of the insights, it's very apparent, like there's no one size fit all solution that is going to work for everyone and in every part of this country. This country, our geography, our cultural diversity as well, means that the supply and distribution needs will vary from community to community, province to province, territory to territory. There's no cookie cutter approach, which of course makes this a big but fun challenge to work on. The other thing I wanted to mention in our consultations was the challenges that rural communities faced with supply. And I mentioned this briefly, but thinking about some of our northern communities, our fly-in communities, not only is supply at times a bit precarious and not always reliable, because products are scarce, because the transportation costs associated with getting them to some parts of our country, it makes them incredibly expensive as well. So there's the issue of access, just being able to get your hands on products, but then there's also the added issue of costs for people in these communities. So again, as we design this national pilot project, the flexibility, I think, is an important consideration for us as we move forward. So I don't want to take all your time, but I do want to mention there's a few really incredible examples in the country that I just have to call out to bring your attention to, because it's just so inspiring to have met with and to learn what some of these people are doing. So one of them, one example of project, a grassroots project, was in the Yukon. It was two sisters, Aisha and her sister was Abir, who essentially they created, we went and visited it, but it was like an outdoor winterized or weatherized pantry, where it was out front, just on the side of the sidewalk, and people could leave products or people could take products. Very simple solution, but one that, first of all, someone had to take the initiative to start, but second of all, the community really embraced. And it was wonderful to see, and in our conversations even since, that the community has really stepped up in spades to continue to stock it, which is really quite incredible. And it gives those in need in that community 24/7, no questions asked access. They can simply walk up to the pantry, open the door, take what they need, carry on, which I think is a really incredible initiative. Another organization that I just fell in love with was Moontime Sisters. Moontime Sisters, and I believe they've recently rebranded to True North Aid. They are an organization. They're the leaders, if you will, are in different parts of the country, including here in Ontario. But it's the only Indigenous-led period equity group, and it's entirely volunteer run. And the efforts that these volunteers, these women, go to source product, and the challenges of shipping and getting it up to our northern communities, I learned so much from these ladies. It's really quite incredible, the work that they do, the partnerships that they've forged on the ground in these communities, who then distribute the products. Really quite amazing. The other one I mentioned already, Period Purse, or sorry, I haven't mentioned Period Purse, I mentioned Period Packs. Period Purse as well, Toronto-based. They have some activities locally as well. But not only are they providing menstrual products, but they also prioritize the education and awareness piece, which I think is so important as we all work to have these more open conversations and destigmatizing menstruating. The other piece that I really love, I'm sorry, I could ramble forever, I promise I'll end soon, but the other piece that I really love in this space is how much love all of these grassroots organizations have for each other. There's so much camaraderie, there's so much respect and collaboration amongst these grassroots organizations who really are all just striving to fill a need and ensure that they're providing products to those most in need. That's really quite beautiful, including, as I mentioned, here in Ottawa. So the last piece I want to touch on is just to mention, I've shared with you the work that I've been doing on the Menstrual Equity Fund, but it is one piece of a bigger federal government strategy to address period poverty. So two of my colleagues are also doing some really incredible work. So that includes the Minister of Labour, Seamus O'Regan, who is also very much engaged, and he's working to bring free access to menstrual products in every toilet room in every federally regulated workplace. So it's a big piece of work, which is really quite exciting. And I'll tell you, so that includes airports. And a few weeks ago, I had a bunch of travel across this country. I won't get into it. It was torturous, but I noted that in the Vancouver airport and in the Halifax airport, there was a basket with products sitting out on the counter in the bathroom, which is amazing. It wasn't at Toronto, unfortunately, but all that to say, it's really great to see that it's really starting to come to fruition. And the work that he's doing, airports are just one example, but all federally regulated workplaces will soon be required by law to be providing free menstrual products. So yay for that. The other minister who's doing some great work in this space is Minister Patty Hajdu for Indigenous Services. So Indigenous Services, and this started last year, are providing the funding to First Nations and Inuits governments to purchase products to distribute within the schools for First Nations and Inuit students. That started last year, and by all accounts is having impact. As I mentioned, Indigenous rural remote communities are where we saw the biggest need. So really great to see that unrolling as well. All that to say, still so much more work to be done, but really glad to have the time with committed, passionate people like yourselves, who I know, amongst all the brains and the desire here on this screen, I know that together we can continue to address period poverty to ensure that, just like toilet paper, menstrual products are available to menstruators in public bathrooms as well, through the Menstrual Equity Fund, as I mentioned, whoever is in need. So just to summarize, thrilled to have this opportunity tonight, and incredibly proud to be able to work in this space with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MP Sets, for allowing us to learn from you and your work, and for sharing all you've been doing to fight for menstrual equity. Now we can take a few moments for a Q&A. So we'll invite folks to either write their questions in the chat, or you can also raise your virtual hand, and we'll do our best to go in order of questions asked. I already see there are a few questions in the chat, so maybe we can start with those. Let me just go through them. So the first question, how can we equip non-menstruators to be allies and advocates? Are there steps your government is taking to ensure the burden doesn't fall on marginalized groups?
So yes. So through, what comes to my top of mind, first of all, is through the Menstrual Equity Fund. A portion of that fund is for education and awareness. And the way I see that happening is, as I mentioned, there's a number of incredible grassroots organizations already doing some great work in this space. But the reality is they're all doing it with very little resources to be able to reach more people, to really be able to make a dent in this issue and to change hearts and minds, which is what we need to do. And so through the Menstrual Equity Fund, we will be, as I said, there's a portion of the funds that will be allocated strictly to this. We will partner and empower and provide the resources to some of these organizations across the country, because again, we need to ensure that that we reach those most in need, to raise awareness, to start to mainstream the conversation about menstruation so that it is not taboo, so that it is part of our day-to-day. And as I mentioned before, so that men and boys are part of the conversation and are comfortable with the conversation, because until we get there, we still have so much more work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question that came in. What can we as average citizens do to help or get involved?
Yeah, well, I believe you're mostly all from Ottawa. So what I would say, and it doesn't matter where you are, to be honest, what I would say is, first of all, use your voice. Use your voice to talk openly about period poverty, about menstruation, because we all have a role and a voice to be able to work towards normalizing this conversation. So first of all, I encourage all of you, have those conversations with men, with boys, with your coworkers, with whoever. Because, as I said, there's a lot of work to do before this is a normal conversation for so many people in this country. So I would say that. And then I would also say, if you want to get involved in a deeper way, to look in your community who is doing the work already. And I'll tell you, these grassroots organizations, and I mentioned here Period Packs, Period Purse, our women's shelters here in Ottawa as well, right? Like our food banks are collecting products. There are a number of organizations who are working to get donations, to get products. In some cases, volunteers to actually help coordinate those products, get those products at the door. I would look to who's doing that in your community, and I would reach out. And I think you'd be surprised. All of the ones that I know don't have paid staff. It's all volunteer driven. It's all the blood, sweat, and tears of caring people like yourselves. So that would be my recommendation. Normalizing the conversation and getting out there to help organizations that are in this space already.
Yeah, I totally agree with the first part, though. Having a discussion with anyone. I understand that it's still a very taboo subject and not everyone will be comfortable with it, but that's just the start of the change.
Yeah, exactly.
So I agree with
Yeah.
that. We're going to take one more question and then we'll move on to the panelists. So what supports do newcomers and refugees have to address period poverty when they may have limited resources to have choice or access?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I did mention the cultural sensitivity piece, and I think this is really really important, particularly when we talk about newcomers and immigrants to our country. And in some of the other work that I do, we've looked at settlement services, for example, and there's a few organizations here in Ottawa who work with newcomers and immigrants. And ensuring that those services are available in many languages, first of all, ensuring that there's culturally sensitive dialogue and products available at the outset through these settlement services, I think is really important. And then the last thing I'd say is also education around Canadian culture and norms when it comes to menstruation, because as a newcomer and an immigrant comes to this country, and as I've said earlier, menstruation is very personal, and it is also influenced by your upbringing, by your culture, by so many things. And as a newcomer to our country, it is important for them to understand and to learn, where are products accessed in Canada? What are the norms that we can expect around menstruation? There's so much to be said about just dialogue, just talking about it. And again, just normalizing it. Whether you're a newcomer, an immigrant, a teenager, a 40-year-old man, like these are conversations everyone needs to have. But to your point, I think those settlement services are the front line as newcomers are coming to our country, and ensuring that they have the resources to be able to serve them is really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, MP Says, for being here with us. We appreciate all the work you've done to combat this issue, and we look forward to following along as you continue to advocate for menstrual equity, both in our community and across the country. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I'll give the floor to Emily, and we'll continue on with the panelists.
Yay, thank you. So exciting, so awesome. So happy to see such a wonderful conversation take place. And thank you so much again, MP Suds, for being here and for kicking off what is so far such an informative conversation. As mentioned, we're now going to move into the next portion of our event, which is the panel discussion. So I'm super, super thrilled to welcome our panelists, Joe from Changing the Flow, whichever side of the screen you're on, and Allison from Cornerstone Housing for Women. So thank you both so much for being here. We did have a third panelist joining us tonight, but they were unfortunately unable to make it. So we will go ahead with the introductions for our two panelists that are here tonight with us. So Joe is a dynamic educator and program facilitator with a passion for learning and community programming. Most recently, Joe has channeled this passion into creating Menstruation Should Be Free, period. I want to learn more about that. An initiative aimed at educating individuals about period poverty and providing tangible ways for individuals to advocate for menstrual equity in their communities. Amazing. Allison has worked with Cornerstone Housing for Women for almost 19 years and recently transitioned to the role of evening manager at the shelter. At the same time, Allison worked in other agencies focusing on violence against women and children, drop-in centers, women in conflict with the law, and volunteered with a youth agency. So amazing people here to continue the conversation that we're having and to provide us with more information regarding period poverty and menstrual equity. So as I've said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to dive into a few questions where each of you will have the chance to respond. And then afterwards, similarly to how we just did with MP Suds, we will open the floor for a Q&A. So keep those questions coming. Drop them in the chat, and we'll be sure to open that up at the end so everybody can continue to participate and to learn together. With that, we'll keep the same order that we did the intros. So Joe, you can speak first when the questions are asked, and then Allison, you can speak second, and we'll run through them together. So as a first question, and I know I alluded to this a little bit with your introductions, but we'll continue just to really get as much info as we can from the both of you. We would love if you would tell us more about your organization and the work you're doing to fight period poverty and achieve menstrual equity. So Joe, I'll give the floor to you, and then Allison, you can continue.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily, and for having us as well. This is amazing to be making space for this conversation. We really appreciate any opportunity to talk about it. So thank you. So yes, as Emily said, my name is Joe. I'm the menstrual equity lead at Changing the Flow, and we are a social enterprise that is dedicated to the achievement of menstrual equity and the elimination of stigma surrounding periods. And we do this through three key pillars, which are awareness, education, and implementation. And so we build awareness through opportunities like this one that allow us to really speak to period poverty in our own communities. We are based out of Kitchener-Waterloo region in Ontario. And so things like conferences and showcases and events are things that we really try to start these conversations at. And so platforms like these are really important to us. We also run a lot of online events, different webinars, panels, unlike this one. And most of those events are recorded and on our social media and website as well for access for those interested. And we do have events coming up as well. We have an in-person one for anyone local to Kitchener-Waterloo for Menstrual Health Day coming up on May 28th. You can stay tuned for that. In terms of education, MP Suds touched on how vital that is to this movement. The education piece is a really big part of my own role at Changing the Flow, where I reach out to schools, school boards. Often students will reach out to us wanting to collaborate, to learn more, to ultimately get period products in their bathrooms. And ultimately what we are able to provide in addition to that is educational resources as well as programming. We present workshops to students, school clubs, parents of those students, faculty members, really anyone with an interest in learning more. And our team also does consultative services and customized workshops for people of all ages and abilities, post-secondary institutions, workplaces, just on the basics of menstrual equity and period poverty, and how truly everyone is involved in the movement, whether or not they menstruate. So really giving people those tools to make their spaces more equitable and allow everyone in them to thrive. In terms of implementation, we, like I said, do sell the products themselves as well. We have an online store where we have organic period products available. We sell pads, tampons with applicators, without applicators. So people can really stock products of their choice in their washrooms that are good for their bodies and also good for the environment as they sort of journey towards really promoting menstrual equity in their homes, in their workplaces, in their schools more widely. We also have a period box subscription service that is right now local to Kitchener-Waterloo that we can provide to those residents that we're hoping to expand, which lets people have delivered to their door every month products to refill their period boxes. What is a period box? Great question. It looks a lot like this. And so you can stock your box with different products as you like. And we also have many boxes that we are very fortunate to collaborate with local artists around. And so they're able to provide us with designs for those boxes that folks can then have in their spaces. Feels like a good place to stop.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name's Allison. Like my intro said, I'm with Cornerstone Housing for Women. So Cornerstone Housing for Women is an emergency shelter for up to 59 women on a nightly basis. But we also have 4 supportive housing locations that host 110 women and gender diverse folk, with 1 opening up in the fall as well. So as you can imagine, we do have a lot of menstruators that come through our doors. Thanks to, our community, our donors, our volunteers, we are well stocked with products. And so in terms of the things that we do, we always had pads, tampons, different products in all of our bathrooms. We started this initiative so that, we could reduce the shame and stigma around asking for a pad. Lots of different people really, you got to whisper, can I have a pad? And, oh, do you have a bag to put that in? And so, we really wanted to kind of reduce that for people having to come to the staff and asking for that. And so, we started out putting products in our bathrooms in little baskets and whatnot. And then COVID hit. And unfortunately, we needed to remove kind of all high touch stuff in our areas. And we had to go back to the old system. So that was kind of sad, but thankfully we are able to open back up a little bit more. And so we are starting to put those products back into our public washrooms with the hopes that, we are reducing the stigma and the shame around having to ask for those products. So another thing that we do, when people come to our door who may be living rough, who may not have access, or really marginalized people, it's very expensive. We never turn anyone away without packing them a really good supply, and we're lucky that our community is very generous in that aspect of things. So
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you. That's awesome. It's so wonderful to hear about the incredible work that's going on, and even more so in detail of what's going on kind of in the day-to-day and as time goes on as well. It's great to hear that, that work is being covered. So thank you so much for that and for sharing. The purpose kind of behind why we wanted to run this event is we're really trying to build awareness. And, as kind of MP Suds was saying, we've got a good group here that is present, that's aware of period poverty and menstrual equity. We've got a solid group of people here who are interested and might be kind of, in tune with what's going on. But still to build that awareness and still to understand what period poverty and menstrual equity are and what they mean. I would love to know, kind of based on your experience and work in this field, which area of period poverty or menstrual equity or both, you pick, do you feel is lacking the most awareness? And so how can we, based on what your answer is, how can we work to ensure that this is more known? We really want to try to build that momentum, build that awareness, that knowledge around these pieces. So where would you say needs the most work in terms of trying to bring that back up? Joe, sorry.
No, it's okay.
We'll follow the same structure.
I inferred it after a second. That's all
good.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about education. That, of course, is in my own role the biggest piece, but also I think just in terms of combating ignorance, combating stigma around this, that is really the only antidote to me. I think educating yourself, educating people in your community, even if it's just talking to your friends, knowing how your government structures work, knowing how your local government works, your city councilors, your MPs, they work for you. So if this is important to you, let them know, because they are ultimately your voice. So kind of equipping yourself with those tools and knowing who to go to, who to hold accountable. That's so vital, not only to this movement, but just for civic engagement more generally. And ultimately, for me, a big piece is policy. And it's amazing to have champions like MP Suds, like Seamus O'Regan, who are making these changes because they are so vital and so overdue. And our communities have been screaming for products. We need them. And the stigma does not really go anywhere without the willingness to be educated. In my own role, I've seen a lot of pushback from schools, from school boards, who are extremely resistant to allowing their students the education around this. We have in Ontario, at least, I know we have pieces of our curriculum that folks need to be talking about menstruation, but there's really not a lot of specificity in terms of what that education looks like, or who is coming to the students with that education. So we do provide options in terms of being kind of that neutral third party to talk to students about it. As we know, it's taboo, there's stigma. I know when I was in high school, it was very common for, people to just have tampons up their sleeves, so no one would ask them about anything, or if they're going to the bathroom, no one can see me with a tampon, God forbid. So really just letting students have those conversations, because all of that is happening. It's not something that they are not aware of, but giving them the tools to really talk about it, making space for students to know that it's a completely normal bodily function that is really common, happening to probably at least half their classmates. That's so crucial. And I think also having really inclusive policy and actively anti-racist policy. We know historically a lot of, especially Indigenous folks, have been excluded from policy even around period poverty in the last few years. In 2021 in Ontario, we had students across the province being promised period products. Indigenous students were not included in that legislation. So to make sure that, again, people are being held accountable, that people are coming to our communities with what they're promising and following through on that is so, so crucial. Honestly, I hope I don't have a job in 10 years. The goal is to work myself out of one. So I'm hoping that if people do really come together, we know our communities are so giving. We know that they're amazing and stocking things like pantries with supplies, like donations, and doing drives for period products for different communities. We know how generous our communities are, but they shouldn't have to be. This really should be something that is provided. Like MP said, that we live in a country that is so advanced. We have so many resources. This should not be something that we're still asking for in 2023. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And it's a good reminder, I think, that we don't need to look for this huge answer, what is this piece that we don't know? What is this unknown? What is this piece of awareness we need to work on? Because a lot of these things, they're very, they might be basic, or they might be things that we experience on the day-to-day, but we might not think of, like putting a tampon up my sleeve, which is something that I still see people do all the time. Like, there are lots of things that seem small and seem trivial, but in reality, they're not. So I think that's a really good reminder that awareness, it can be grand, but it also can reflect those kind of smaller routine things that we might not think of, all the time. So it's a great point. Thank you. Allison?
So in our sector, homelessness sector, you have homelessness, and then you have homelessness with a period, and that just kind of adds a level to what a person is experiencing. And so, as simple as having access to a washroom while they're on the streets. Not everyone has $5 to spend at a store, or has the appropriate attire to walk into a business to be able to change their pad or tampon. Not everybody has access to clean underwear. So it goes beyond the pad and the tampon, but it goes forward to the underwear and the shower and the towel and the safety to do that as well. So, one thing that our sector still needs to see some change on is access to all of those things in a safe, dignified way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe I will build on that a little bit. I'm going to change my next question a smidge, but not too much, just to keep building that momentum from what you were saying. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic that in your work that we will reach these points, Joe, that maybe you won't have a job in the next 10 years, and Allison, that those things will be achieved for folks? Do you feel like we're moving in a good direction? And if yes, why? And maybe if no, why? So how do you see it kind of going? And we'll go to Joe first.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's what brings me to this every day, is that I am optimistic. I see people who are making waves in their communities, at work, at school. The people who, as heart-wrenching as it can be, the people who are of all ages who reach out to us every day and say, like, this is an issue I never really thought about. I just had XYZ experience. Help, like, what do we do to resolve this, to make sure people don't experience this? So I think the fact that there is not only resources that exist now, but people are feeling comfortable enough to reach out to those different resources, to go to their MPs, to go to their city councilors, and have those conversations at all, and to have people who are open to having those conversations. That is quite a huge stride, I think, from where we have been in recent years even. So that definitely keeps me optimistic. I think that we have so much opportunity to collaborate. We're all on this call right now. We probably wouldn't have met each other if not for the internet, for all of these resources that we're able to have, that bring us together. I think that is so powerful. So I think that makes me optimistic too, that we're more interconnected than ever. That there is also, I notice in this work, there's such a willingness to collaborate, often a lot more than there is to compete. Like, I know a lot of these similar organizations doing similar work really try to lift each other up, really try to reach out, support each other with resources, promote each other's events. I think that kind of just the willingness to engage in this work meaningfully, and all having the same goal and being willing to work as a team, is extremely powerful. And so that definitely makes me optimistic.
It's great. Yeah. And I know that even in the planning for this event and this project, as we continue the Global Shapers team here, the Period Poverty Project team, as we like to call ourselves, it's the same idea. We're trying to emphasize amplification and connection and partnership, rather than, trying to do work that's already being done, great work that's already being done, because we see it. We see organizations like yours and MP Suds, taking things on and working towards it. So it's really about finding the people to do it with, rather than doing it on your own, because you don't have to. We're all doing this, and we're all working towards it, and that's really special. And I think that really says something about how we all want to see this move forward. So it's a great point. Go ahead, Allison.
I think unfortunately on the ground level, for people accessing day in, day out to get those products changed, there's still locked doors. There's still signs up in windows saying that you must purchase something to be able to come in. I think there's been a little bit more availability in our community. People are accessing the drop-in centers and the community centers to access those things. The Menstrual Equality Fund obviously is going to make strides to have free access in parts of our city. That, all of the drop-in centers and whatnot are mainly located in the downtown core. So somebody who is living in poverty, that is, precariously housed, that have, major food security issues, they have to choose between food and menstrual products. And they may not have bus tickets to get downtown to access those services. So, but they do probably have a community center in their area. So that's vitally important in terms of people being able to access it equitably.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that to our attention for sure. My last question actually highlights one that was in the chat. So I'm going to double whammy it with the one that I have and connect it to that one. As mentioned in the beginning of the event, when Leah was giving the intro, the Global Shapers community is a network of young people from all over the world who are driving dialogue, action, and change. And so we're representatives of the Ottawa hub specifically, but there's hubs all over Canada, all over the world. Similar to what we saw with MP Suds's Q&A, what advice would you give to young people that are taking action both individually and in groups to help them build awareness on this issue and to act on it? So maybe based on your work or what you see going on within the organization or external to that, through your perspective, what can young people do to help and to support and to act? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my first response would be that this is, again, it's a movement that is relevant to everyone, regardless of your interests or your skill set. You fit in this movement. So if that's, reaching out to your local counselor, reaching out to your MP, and that's something that you're comfortable doing, that you feel empowered to do, that's a great idea. If it is going to school, getting your friends together and saying like, hey, I'd really like to talk to our principal about getting period products in the washrooms, also a great idea. You can get connected with a superintendent. You can get connected with custodial staff, with folks who can give you a better idea of maybe what the obstacles are. Also, like was mentioned earlier, there are so many different initiatives, organizations working towards the same goals. There's likely one in your community if you haven't heard of it. And if there isn't one, you can reach out to us and we can direct you appropriately. But there are so many people working towards this that, yeah, you will definitely find them in your community. And if you don't, you can definitely start that movement. And I think also just cross-sectoral collaboration is so vital because, again, there's so many different ways that this issue needs to be approached. Only going to our schools, only going to our workplaces, only going to XYZ group is not really going to be effective because it's so multifaceted. It needs to be approached from so many different angles. So again, wherever you feel kind of most empowered to jump in, I guarantee that there are all hands on deck, and yours would make a world of difference too. Yeah.
That's great. Allison?
Yeah, for us, we go through a lot of products. We're always needing it. If young people are looking to get involved in this movement, getting right down to the people who are giving out the products, always helpful. Contacting them, seeing what they need. And sometimes what was kind of mentioned earlier in terms of choice, not everybody wants pads or tampons. Sometimes they may want a Diva cup or something alternative to that. Somebody may have sensory issues and may want period underwear. Those are kind of all things that don't regularly kind of get donated. So having, some access to different products or some money that we can go out and buy those products, and just, continuing to keep the conversation going in terms of what the needs are. And I cannot stress enough, underwear is always a big thing that's needed, right down to our basic needs, right? So.
That's great. Thank you both so much. This has been so enriching and so wonderful. And I think just like MP said, I could talk, we could keep going for hours and hours. I think this is such a great conversation and so informative. So I super appreciate the both of you sharing and bringing all of this to our attention. We will open the Q&A now. So very similar format to before. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat or to raise your hand virtually or like this if you'd like. And we will answer your question or ask your question. I will kick off with the one that's in the chat, and then I hope to see a few other folks ask questions that they may have. I do see that MP Suds is still on the line. So if anybody has another question that they would like to ask MP Suds, we can do that too. But we'll start with the one that's in the chat, which is, what is a success story that inspired you recently to continue the work you do? So recent, but you could give one that's not recent too. And it's okay. I know Eliza, so I'll change your question a little for that. Just base yourself on your experience. And we can keep the same structure if you like. So Joe, if you want to answer first, if you have an answer.
Yeah, one I think that sticks out to me is 3 girls reached out to us who are doing their CEGEP and in Quebec, and they are focusing on period poverty, and they are just full steam ahead, really advocating for period products at the facility that they're doing their CEGEP, kind of going through all these different channels, trying to learn the ropes of who they can contact regarding this. They are, of course, kind of noticing the obstacles that are in the way, which is that while they can ask for free period products, that kind of runs out quite quickly. It's not, they're trying to find sustainable solutions to make sure that those products stay in schools. So we've chatted with them and hoping to collaborate with them to figure something out in terms of how we can uplift their own initiative. But I think that they came to us, and the fact that this is kind of so top of mind for them that they are focused on this for a significant portion of time, I think was, again, kind of a double-edged sword, very inspiring to me, but not something that they should have to do. Again, hoping that they work themselves out of that advocacy. But that definitely kind of reminded me that this is something that is needing a lot of attention right now. This is something that we do need to continue to work on. And so, yeah, I think that's something that just really sticks in my mind. I think of that interaction quite a lot, that really just keeps me kind of engaged, and it reminds me of why I'm doing this work.
Thank you. Allison, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier in terms of the whispering, can I have a pad? When it's no longer a whisper, or they're not grabbing the bag right away and kind of turning away, or they're saying, oh, actually I don't like that pad, can I have, do you have any thicker, do you have any thinner? And so then they get to the point that they're no longer embarrassed about asking us for a pad, and now they're requesting what they prefer to be. So really basic again, but really prevalent in the work that we do.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it's small things, big things, they all have the same amount of prominence. They all take that piece to kind of show us how important that this work is. So it's, again, a great reminder that, it might seem small, but in reality it's not. So that's great. Any other questions, comments even, that anybody would like to share, whether it be in the chat or verbally? Happy to have people participate. So if anybody would like to ask a question or anything, we'll leave the floor open for a moment. Maybe. It's okay. If not, no worries. Great. Okay. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Lena. Sorry.
This is more of a comment, and I'm going back to that education piece, but like there's gonna be policy changes within the government, and I feel like it's important to make this aware to people that are obviously impacted by these policy changes. So like I'm going back to like I think early in 2016-17, Doug Ford decided to change the policy on birth control and IUDs and how it's not going to be funded anymore or something like that. And I remember like all university students, they just ran to get their IEDs placed because they finally heard about this. But then there are other women who didn't know about this and they didn't meet the cutoff date. So when we talk about education and talking about things, it just hit me that like, yeah, like these conversations are so important because ultimately people that are being impacted want to hear about it and be updated on it. So that's just like a random comment that I wanted to throw in.
Yeah, no, it's great. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was not to put Allison on the spot. I think that that's a really important point, especially for folks who maybe don't have a permanent address, who are not, staying up to date with policy changes. And so I guess my own question would be, with those challenges in access, with folks that maybe you see more infrequently, you don't always necessarily know where to find them or how to distribute information to them. What does that look like, I guess, in terms of just distributing information?
Yeah, I mean, a good place to start would be any of our outreach teams that are in the city of Ottawa. They drive around and they drive shelter to shelter and shelter to hospital. They also go around looking for all of the persons who may be sleeping rough, that won't come into the shelters, that won't have access to clean products and whatnot. So definitely for sure, starting with the inner city teams that are on the streets and doing the outreach, providing them with the information so that they can hand out supplies too.
Go ahead, Lena.
I have one. This is not my question. This is actually Anna's question, but I really liked it. So I'm gonna ask it, and I hope you're okay with it. I know you're traveling right now. How can we ensure that trans and non-binary menstruators in our communities are supported in ways that are both gender affirming and safe?
Yeah, that is a huge question. That is one that we, again, the education piece is so vital because that is where our organization is one that is quite vocal about things like inclusive language, using, menstruators as an example of something we try to move towards as using sort of more gender neutral language to address folks, because we do chat with people all the time who are identify as non-binary or trans that do menstruate, and they find themselves not a part of this conversation and often not welcome in these conversations. And that's something that we really want to address head on, and ensure that that is not something that we are continuing to perpetuate. So I think for one, language, validating people's identities, what their experiences are, believing that those are their experiences, I think is huge, just in making folks feel like they can talk to us openly and honestly about their experiences and their needs, ultimately, because that makes our own work better. That helps us to inform our outreach, how we're approaching things, because that is crucial. People are not going to be open to learning if they're not feeling safe. So that is a really big piece for us. Yeah. I'm not sure if that answers the question. I'm not sure.
For me, it does, but it wasn't my question. So
Let me know. I love that question.
Allison, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, for us, it's about having the products available without having to ask a staff member, right? So already dealing with a magnitude of issues, never mind having to, ask for a pad or tampon when they don't feel like they fit in the body that they're asking for the pad and tampon for. So just, being able to go into a bathroom without anybody knowing and accessing supplies definitely is our part in making people feel accepted.
No, that's great. Thank you. And thank you, Lena, for flagging that question again. I am being cognizant of time, so I'm going to close the Q&A, which I know I'm sad too. I wish we could do this all night, but we will bring the event to a close. So I want to thank everyone, panelists, MP Suds, everyone for your time, your knowledge, your questions, and for participating in our event. We've been planning this event for a few months now. And it's all thanks to the Period Poverty Project team, as I alluded to earlier. But notably, I'd like to thank Lena, Sandy, Leah, and Anna for their commitment to and enthusiasm in this project, but mostly for their patience and putting up with me. Thank you so much for your support with this project and for helping to push it through. This has been a huge success, and it would not have been without you, so thank you. Before we sign off, we have one final, very exciting part of the agenda, which is our draw prize. We've done a random draw, and the winner of the prize, which is a book titled Period Power, a Manifesto for the Menstrual Movement, is Clara. So congratulations to Clara. I am going to drop our email address in the chat. And if you could reach out to us to coordinate, we will be more than happy to send this book your way. Only if you promise your review, because we are so excited to hear if you like it. Thank you, everyone. And please be sure to keep an eye out for future events hosted by us, the Ottawa Global Shapers team, or other Global Shapers hubs across the country. We look forward to seeing you again and to working together to combat period poverty. We've got this. Let's do it. Thanks so much and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. See you.
Have a good one.
You too.